All right, thanks so much for being with us on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin here with my colleague, political reporter Doug Reardon, joining us. Thanks for being with us, Doug. Wanted to hop on here because if you haven't heard the news yet, we're following this breaking news of Atlanta losing its bid to host the 2024 Democratic National Convention. It's something that, of course, Democrats had been pushing for, and really hoping that it would kind of put Atlanta on the map as kind of a battleground state. And of course, there are economic reasons as well to want to host this. Doug, what's your reaction to this breaking news?
I am surprised. First of all, I think that a lot of people saw Atlanta as the front runner. They have been certainly in the top three for a number of months now. But certainly given what happened in the last election, presidential election, I think a lot of eyes were on Atlanta. I think a lot of eyes were on the South and Georgia in particular because of the swing from red to blue that they made during not just the presidential election, but also the Senate race between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, where Warnock ended up taking that seat. And so, again, we heard from Mayor Andre Dickens. He said about 2 weeks ago that we were in the final two, and we very quickly learned that Chicago was the other city that was still in the running for this, and we, came really, really close. So for whatever that's worth, but horseshoes and hand grenades on that one, it doesn't really matter. Like you mentioned, there are so many reasons you would want to host this national convention. The economic reasons are one of them. We're talking about economic impacts of millions of dollars, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people would have come here, be they delegates, party members, people who just want to attend and be around the Democratic National Convention. It would have brought a lot of people to the city. It would have brought a lot of money to the hotels, the restaurants, and the businesses that are around downtown and metro Atlanta that would have stood to benefit from this. And of course, there are the political implications as well. You're, cementing yourself as a center for the party, as a place where they view the political importance as being enough to come and host their convention here. And so, I think the political implications of hosting a DNC are obvious. Just for a little bit of historical context, the last time that Atlanta hosted this event was back in 1988. Michael Dukakis was the nominee back then, so it has been quite a long time. The last time Chicago hosted, 1996, the year that Atlanta had the Olympics here. But we should also note that Chicago has hosted more political conventions than any other U.S. city as the host, and that includes the RNC as well. They've had a couple there, but Chicago certainly has gotten the love from both political parties, whereas Atlanta has. It's been a number of decades. So, as for what actually went into this decision, we know that President Joe Biden, who you're seeing there, called Chicago and told them. Not this morning that they had been the recipients of the DNC. And it's interesting because Chicago, in my mind, for the record, I just came from the Midwest covering news in Michigan for 8 years, part of that big blue wall along with Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan as well, and Pennsylvania. But it's got a lot of the same infrastructure as Atlanta. It's got hotels, it's got convention centers. They have O'Hare and Midway airports like we have Hartsfield-Jackson, so it would have been easy to get people in and out of a city that size. And again, they're part of that big blue wall, so we talk about the political implications of this. This is very clear to us now that Democrats are trying to cement their position in the upper Midwest between Michigan, which we know President Trump won in 2016, Joe Biden won in 2020, Wisconsin, which is always a purple state, if not leaning a bit red these days, and Illinois, which is pretty typically solidly blue, but you want to think about the surrounding areas where you'll be wanting to attract voters for this upcoming race in 2024. And so I think Democrats' intentions here were very clear in wanting to cement and bolster that big blue wall in the upper Midwest. There's not a whole lot of ground for them to gain here in the South outside of Atlanta. I remember a quote by Rick Perry where he was talking about Austin and said it was a blueberry in a bowl of tomato soup, right? And that's kind of what, yeah, it's a good one, right? That's kind of what Atlanta is, right? It's that blue area in a very, very big sea of red. And so I think Democrats kind of said, well, we'll take our chances on the place we know we can probably get more voters. And what does that say, I guess, to voters here in Atlanta, especially the black voting base here in Atlanta that handed Joe Biden the White House in 2020 and also, again, handed them the Senate retention in 2020 as well with those runoffs. So, the other thing, too, here is Chicago also offered to pay for the DNC. I would be remiss in forgetting to note that, too, because I think that the financials play a role here as well. even given the economic impacts that the city stands to garner from hosting an event like this. I mean, you still have to put up the costs, and so I think that probably had a lot to do with this as well. Their governor, J.B. Pritzker, comes from a very wealthy background. He offered to personally pay for any of the costs associated that the party couldn't cover for this event, and so I think that certainly had a lot to do with it. And so, are we disappointed? Absolutely. This would have been a great event for us, not only to cover, but to have in the city for the economic impacts and for the political standing too. I mean, there's no question in acknowledging that places that host DNCs, RNCs, are viewed as very valuable areas politically for some of these, or for these parties. So definitely disappointing.
So in some sense, would you say that it's not just a loss for Democrats, but also Republicans, or really anyone that cares about politics and putting, really making Georgia a major player in the political landscape?
I think it's probably encouraging for Republicans that Democrats, seem to not be putting as much stock in the South as they probably could have. Like I said, the decision to host, to choose a city to host this event in particular, a DNC or an RNC, really speaks to how much value you place on that region in particular. And for Democrats, obviously, now we know that they're placing more value on the Midwest region than they are here in the South. And again, there are reasons for that. I'm not going to stand here and pretend like there aren't strategic reasons for them hosting this in Chicago. There are, but it also just again speaks to the fact that you don't have much ground to gain outside of Atlanta and some of these bluer areas in Georgia. Certainly, though, one area where that's not necessarily true is South Carolina. I mean, Joe Biden won that state when he was running back in 2020, and there were talks that Democrats could move up their primary in South Carolina in this upcoming election. And so, but outside of that, there's really not a whole lot of ground to gain in Florida and Alabama and Tennessee and the surrounding areas here in the South. And so I think Democrats are kind of putting their eggs in a basket that already has a lot of eggs in it. And they're just trying to play it safe and make sure that they cement that blue wall up there in the Midwest region, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, just because, again, those states, I mean, electorally are so valuable, again, just like Georgia is. But where do you want to take the risk, right?
Right, and with the Republican National Convention being held in 2024 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, seems like that was a big part of the decision to kind of make sure, like you said, that they're competing for those votes in that area.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, right? It's the big blue wall has been a little less blue these days. Like I said, Trump won Michigan in 2016. Wisconsin has always been on shaky ground ever since 2016 as far as which way they voted presidentially. But, it is a bit of a shame because Georgia was showing signs of going purple as well. I think we're kind of there, actually, given those two wins by Warnock and Biden in the last 4 years. But, it is a shame because I think there were a lot of people here who wanted to feel rewarded for the efforts that they put in voting for these Democratic candidates and giving them their seats. And so, I should note, too, that we're going to be covering this over the next couple days as well. We're going to be talking to a lot of people who were excited about having this potentially come here to get their thoughts on what's gonna, what the sentiment is now that it is not going to be hosted in Atlanta. But it's the political implications from hosting this event certainly do dictate how much importance the parties place on these regions, and it just appears they're prioritizing that Midwest region.
And could it also mean Georgia losing its place, or its early place in a Democratic primary calendar as well?
Yeah, it's not a good sign. We weren't necessarily counting on that being the case. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said he would maybe consider it in 2028. So it wasn't looking super great for Georgia to have that early primary role in the first place, just because of whatever red tape was going to be there from state officials anyways. But yes, if there was even a glimmer of a chance, this certainly does not help with convincing the Democratic Party to move that primary up.
And Mayor Andre Dickens said earlier today that, he got the call this morning with the news and so forth. But, I mean, he was very diplomatic about it. Is that pretty, kind of just to be expected? He was he congratulated Chicago.
He did. Yes, he said congratulations to Chicago. And, I mean, he noted the efforts that he and his team put into this. And like I said, we got a great opportunity to talk to the mayor about 2.5 weeks ago when he told us, in a one-on-one interview, that Atlanta was in the final two, and he was very, very excited about that. I mean, you could tell, and why not? I mean, you could assume that any mayor would be excited about having this event of this scope and this scale in their city. Again, not only for the economic impacts too, but because it puts you center stage, not just for the Democratic Party, but you know that Republicans are watching this as well. And so, yeah, definitely some disappointment there, but all class from the mayor today in his statement to us, congratulating Chicago and noting again the efforts of his team to try and get this done. A couple weeks ago, about maybe 3 days before our interview a couple weeks ago, the mayor had been given approval by the City Council of Atlanta to go ahead and start negotiating with some of the hotel unions and MARTA and the police to open up some pathways to try and plan an event this big. And so that to us was very promising that he had gone ahead and gotten the approval to start essentially making plans to host the DNC. And so, again, I'm very surprised by this. It really wasn't anything that Mayor Dickens had much of a say in. He could do his best. He noted in his statement that he did his best, but this ultimately was up to the White House and party leaders at the Democratic National Convention. They see some more value in that Midwest region than they do down here in the South.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's very interesting to note. So I just want to point out that New York was also in the running, but Mayor Dickens said today, he said that we were actually the top two, Chicago and Atlanta, and ultimately it was Chicago who got it. But why not New York? Why do you think not New York either?
It's hard to say. It could be just a matter of the infrastructure. It could be the fact that, again, if you're going to talk about a region that is solidly blue, the Northeast is certainly that region. I mean, you have such a stronghold there between, Maine and Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Pennsylvania sometimes, and certainly New York being as blue as it is for the majority of it. And New York City, I mean, bluer than any other piece of that region. And so, I think it was kind of a scale, right? You have to think about where you stand to gain the most ground and what's going to be most valuable for you. And again, that's why I'm surprised that they didn't pick Atlanta, is because you have a lot of blue support in that Midwest region, probably less than you do in the Northeast, which is why they strayed away from New York. You've kind of already got that one in the bag. And so, but again, that is part of the reason why I'm surprised they didn't try and take a chance on Atlanta to energize his voting base ahead of that 2024 election. But that would be my guess as to why New York wasn't picked. You're already good there, essentially.
Yeah, makes sense. That makes sense. Well, thank you so much, political reporter Doug Reardon, joining us, with that information and the analysis. We so appreciate it. I know you're going to continue to follow this and all of our other top political stories.
We'll see you soon.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on Atlanta News First Plus. We're going to have the latest on this as well on our 3 p.m. traditional broadcast over the air. And, of course, you'll always get the latest on our app, Atlanta News First Plus app. Have a great day.